In the 1950s and early 1960s, homosexuality was widely considered to be immoral and illegal in the United States. The 1950s and 1960s were dark ages for lesbian and gay men. Homosexuality was known as a mental illness and was disgusted by people. Doctors used to say that homosexuality was a mental defect and maybe even a form of psychopathy. Discrimination against LGBTQ individuals was terrible, and they faced significant social stigma, harassment, and persecution. Gay people are often ostracized from their communities and face discrimination in housing, employment, and public life. The Stonewall Riots was a series of spontaneous protests by the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer LGBTQ community in response to a police raid that took place June 28, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn was a gay bar located in Greenwich Village, New York City. The riots lasted for 6 days, and their resistance by the people of the bar was a turning point in the fight for the LGBTQ rights, leading to increased activism and a greater push for equality. What happened during the Stonewall Riots? On June 28, 1969, a group of police officers raided the bar, arresting employees and patrons. The raid was part of a wider crackdown on gay bars and clubs in the city, which were seen as hotspots of criminal activity. However, this raid would prove to be different from the others. The police officers were told to enter the bar and announce the place was under arrest. When the police entered, they announced to everyone to exit the bar and have a form of identification to prove who they are. Those who did not have identification or who were dressed in clothing that did not match their gender were arrested. The raid was violent, and police officers used excessive force to subdue the patrons. However, this time, the people of the bar started shouting, "We're not going," and fought back, and the raid turned into a violent confrontation between the police and the LGBTQ community. As the raid continued, a crowd of onlookers gathered outside the Stonewall Inn. Many of these onlookers were part of the LGBTQ community, and they were angry and frustrated with the constant harassment and discrimination they faced. As the police began to take patrons out of the bar and into waiting police vans, the crowd grew increasingly agitated. At some point, a woman in the crowd shouted, "Why don't you do something?" and the crowd began to throw objects at the police. The police responded with force, and a riot broke out. Over the course of the next few days, protests and demonstrations took place in the streets of Greenwich Village and other parts of the city. A lot of people reference this as the Rosa Parks movement, when people stood up for what they believe in. After the Stonewall Inn got raided, the LGBTQ community organized protests and formed activist groups. This protest, which was spontaneous and unorganized, quickly turned into a confrontation with the police officers. The protesters shouted slogans such as "Gay Power" and "We Shall Overcome." As they clashed with the police, the marches were the first highly visible public events for people to express their feelings and express their gay sexuality. The few days after the first confrontation, when the police stormed the Stonewall Inn, lots of people came out to support gay rights. The LGBTQ community hosted the marches so they could meet people that were exactly like them. They were finally able to be themselves. People came all over the world to celebrate and to participate in the protests for LGBTQ rights. There was very little news coverage and photographs from the raid and riots, but there were some interviews done with some of the people involved in the riots and marches. How did the Stonewall Riots make an impact? In many countries, the LGBTQ community has gained more legal rights and protections in recent years. Some of these rights include the ability to marry, adopt children, and serve openly in the military. People now do not have to hide how they feel and can be open about their relationships. However, discrimination and inequality still exist. There is still a lot of work to make sure that these rights stay and continue to ensure equal rights to the LGBTQ community. The LGBTQ community has come a long way since the 1960s. While the fight for equality is far from over, it is important to acknowledge the significant progress that has been made. One of the most significant changes has been the legalization of same-sex marriage. Before the landmark Supreme Court case, Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, same-sex marriage was only legal in a few states. In the 1960s, it was not even on the table. Dating someone with the same sex was thought as unacceptable. Same-sex couples were not able to receive the same legal protections as heterosexual couples, and many were forced to live in secret. The legalization of same-sex marriage has not only allowed same-sex couples to publicly declare their love and commitment to one another, but has also granted them the same legal rights and protections as heterosexual couples. Another way things are much better for the LGBTQ community is no discrimination policies. In the 1960s, it was legal to discriminate against someone based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Today, there are federal laws in place that prohibit discrimination against LGBTQ individuals in areas such as employment, housing, and public accommodations. The LGBTQ community has also gained greater visibility and representation in popular culture and media. In the 1960s, LGBTQ individuals were almost entirely absent from mainstream media. Those who did not make an appearance were often portrayed in a negative point of view. However, today, there are numerous LGBTQ characters on television shows, movies, and in books. Many of them are portrayed as complex, good, and fully realized individuals. This increase in visibility has not only helped to break down stereotypes and increase understanding, but has also provided LGBTQ individuals with important role models. Conclusion. The Stonewall Riots were a pivotal moment in the history of the LGBTQ rights movement, making a turning point in the fight for equality and inspiring significant legal and social changes. The impact of the Stonewall Riots continues to be felt today, as LGBTQ people and allies continue to fight for equal rights and acceptance. The impact of the Stonewall Riots was felt not just in New York City, but throughout the United States and around the world. The riots galvanized the LGBTQ community, sparking a new era of activism and advocacy for LGBTQ rights. The Stonewall Riots are widely credited with launching the modern LGBTQ rights movements and paved the way for significant legal and social changes. And then here are some references that I used throughout the slides.